Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order when you check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Sports Pictorium Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. If he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL helmet poster. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
Throughout the long history of sports, all sports, there have been many who have played the game and afterwards became a coach and or a manager. A few have even moved from the playing field to becoming an official. But you'd be hard-pressed to find someone as unique as Hank O'Day. And next, on Sports Forgotten Heroes, we're going to talk about the only man who went from player to umpire to manager and back to umpire in the history of Major League Baseball, Hank O'Day.
This is Sports Forgotten Heroes, a tribute to the stars who shaped the games we love to watch and the games we love to play. Stars who provided us with many thrills, but when their time was up, they faded away. We'll take a look back at their spectacular careers, their moments of fame, even if it was just for one season or just one game. And now, here's your host, Warren Rogan.
Hello and welcome back to Sports Forgotten Heroes. As always, thanks for being here as we continue our journey through sports history and talk about the figures of the game whom time has forgotten. And today, another such figure. A guy who not only pitched in the majors, but he was also a manager and an umpire. And it was there, as an umpire, that he made his most significant contributions to Major League Baseball. We're talking about Hank O'Day. And in just a few minutes, Dennis Bingham, who spends his spare time on the diamond umpiring baseball games, and who is also a longtime member of SABR, he'll join us for a most interesting conversation about Hank O'Day. And one thing you'll notice about Dennis, he speaks about O'Day in a most passionate and exhilarating way. Dennis knows the Hank O'Day story better than almost anyone, and I'm thrilled that he agreed to share what he knows about Hank with us. O'Day played in the majors starting way back in 1884 in the American Association, which, at the time, was considered the best baseball there was. Hank pitched for Toledo and later Pittsburgh. Then he moved on to Washington in the National League in 1886 and finished his career in New York playing for the New York Giants, where he went 22-13 in his last season. Afterwards, O'Day became an umpire. How he got there is quite interesting. Was surprisingly called back into the dugout as a manager, and then he went back out onto the diamond as an umpire. And it was there, as an umpire, that Hank O'Day made his mark. He was the man in the middle of the famous Merkle Boner, and later he was asked to consult on several rules, many of which are employed today. O'Day was also as serious as one could get. His life was baseball. He conducted himself off the field as if he were still on the diamond umpiring a game. Always serious, in almost a very sad matter. And we'll get into all of that with Dennis in just a moment. First, though, a few notes. You can learn more about our guests and the forgotten heroes we talk about by visiting our website, sportsfh.com. That's sportsfh.com. There you can also check out past episodes, check in to see who we're going to be talking about next, and you can even drop us a note and make suggestions for future podcasts. Look for our page on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and follow us on Twitter at SportsFHeroes. And please, let your family and friends know about Sports Forgotten Heroes too. they just might like what you're listening to as well. And as always, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen. All right, back to O'Day. As I had mentioned before, he consulted on many of the rules of which are still in use today, and he helped nix many other suggested rules. O'Day loved baseball, and he lived it every single day of his life. In fact, if you approached O'Day off the field and you wanted to talk with him about anything other than baseball, he had no interest in carrying on a conversation with you. You might say in his own way, especially during the off season, Hank O'Day was somewhat of a hermit. But he was one heck of an ambassador for the game, and here now, to talk more about Hank O'Day, is one of the most passionate guests about his subject matter that we have ever had on Sports Forgotten Heroes, Dennis Bingham. Dennis, tell us a little bit about yourself to start with, your involvement with SABR and how long you've been a member and how you stay involved with baseball.
That's a good question. Well, baseball is my passion. It's every almost waking moment that I'm thinking of. There's family and then there's baseball. So I wasn't that talented a player, so I mainly stay into it in umpiring. This is my 51st year, in fact, umpiring this year.
Good for you.
I think I started when I was 1. No, I'm older than that, right? No, but so I stay in the game that way, doing all different levels, minor league, college, high school, youth, etc. But I also write a lot about it. I love researching it. With SABR, God, I've been a member since, the early 80s. This is the 1980s, not the 1880s. I'm not that old. But, and I realized when I was there they didn't have an umpires or rules committee, so I founded it with 2 other members, and so it's a big passion of mine, baseball, particularly umpiring, the rules, etc.
Awesome. Now let's talk about Hank O'Day. Certainly a tall topic. Why take on such a challenge to write a biography about Hank? I mean, he is certainly one of the most unique individuals to ever put on a baseball uniform or an umpire's uniform.
That is true. Well, because he was always being obsessed about umpires. Again, some would call it a fetish. Hank O'Day was always one of my heroes, even though we're talking the early part of the 19th century and the early decades of the 20th century. But he was always, because he's so unique, he's one of the few men who have played, umpired, and managed at the major league level. He was a World Series pitching hero. He had one of the greatest starts of any rookie manager in history. He was the home plate umpire for 23 World Series games.
Wow.
Behind the plate for 4 no-hitters. But again, and he was so influential. He dramatically transformed baseball. And
he played a huge role. He played a huge role in the rules in which the game is played by today. So he wasn't just an umpire. He wasn't just a manager. He wasn't just a player. He actually contributed to the way the game is played today.
Huge. You can't exaggerate how influential he was. Probably, it's tough to even pick out where he was the most influential, but he is certainly affected the game now. Is probably not to get into it too much, but what happened was in the 1890s when he first started umpiring, baseball was in bad shape. It really was. It was a dirty game. It was a brutal game. It was fielders would trip base runners as they're running around the bases. The umpiring was poor because they're there, hey, I'm not going to be in this game. Forget it. Women weren't coming out to the ballpark. Attendance kept going down. And that's when Hank O'Day started umpiring. And he started out in the majors, in the minors. And when he was in the Western League, I don't know if you're familiar with that, it was a minor league in the 1890s, the Western League, run by Ban Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And they ran it totally different than any other professional league in that there was very little brutality. There were suspensions, ejections, fines. Ban Johnson did a great job. And when Hank O'Day was there, after being a player, he goes, this is the way baseball should and could be. So when he was promoted to the majors, that's when he goes, I'm going to change this game. And he did. And in a way, you could say that he saved the game. Also with Ban Johnson, who came up later when he started the American League, in that it became a more popular sport. Mm-hmm. They got rid of the rowdiness, the unsportsmanlike conduct. There were fights on the field almost every day. There was fights in the stands, fans running out on the field, fighting with the players. It was terrible. And O'Day really made a difference by using his authority and changing it. It took guts, but he really helped transform the game. And that's just one small thing with the rules.
Sure. How difficult and how long did it take you to write his biography? I mean, after all, there's not a whole lot out there about Hank O'Day.
Exactly. That's why it was particularly difficult with him. But the more I looked, though, the more I found, of course, because he was so influential. But his name would be hidden in reports. Oh, he did this, he did that. He was a member of the Rules Committee for years. So I would find that, research it, and find the report. Oh, wow. Because what made it tough was he was such a stoic, quiet figure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't sit for interviews. He wouldn't. He believed that the players were the most important part of the game, not the umpire. He would eject people, of course, but then he would pull back. He wouldn't hold grudges. So it was tough to find out. But the more I researched, the more I found him as a man. But you're right. It was tough. It took years on and off. It wasn't like straight until I kept building up a nice file on this remarkable figure. Mm-hmm. I think one of the most interesting figures in baseball history.
Absolutely. What about his upbringing? Where did his interest in baseball come from?
That is cool because every aspect of his life, it's fascinating. Okay, he was born in Chicago in 1859. Okay, right from the beginning. Okay, and that's what makes O'Day interesting. Not so much that he was a great umpire, but just his character. He was such an interesting, oddball character. Well, he would never talk about his age, so there was, everywhere I researched this, his birthday. What was it? Was it 1862? Well, that's written on his official card in the Hall of Fame as an umpire. Okay, was it 1858? Which was on some reports. And then I would find other accounts that it was 1861. But that was crossed off and a different date was put on. So I'm there, what the heck? And he would never talk about it. Okay, the reporters, because he was known in his time, would ask him, hey, how old are you, old Hank? Wouldn't say anything. He was very tight-lipped about it. So I researched the census reports, and I found out that he was born on July 8th, 1859.
Wow.
See, what made it tough is he was born in Chicago. His birth certificate was lost in the Great Chicago Fire. So that's what made it tough.
Okay.
So I had to go to the census reports. Well, in any case, continuing with his earlier life, which I thought was cool, back to the baseball. He was a middle child of 7, born to deaf parents, James and Margaret, who were Irish immigrants.
And the deaf parents, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. There's a cool
good
story about
with
that. Yeah.
Right. Well, in any case, his father just operated a small farm. This was, Chicago, but that's how he helped make his living. He worked as a plumber a little bit and everything else. But Hank and his 2 older brothers spent most of their formative years playing baseball on the many open fields of Chicago. Because Chicago in that time, we're talking 1850s, 1860s, a huge semi-pro league. A lot of major leaguers came out of them. It was a huge active league. Charles Comiskey was the same age as Hank, and he was a teammate on one of them.
Wow.
But the O'Day brothers, they would play under the name Day because they didn't want their father learning about this because he disapproved of his sons playing what he called the frivolous pastime of baseball. He wanted them to learn a trade.
Yeah, what? Let me interrupt you for a second. We hear about this so many times, especially with ball players back in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, that the parent of the father of the person that we're talking about didn't approve of him playing baseball or football or whatever the sport was. Why do you think that happened?
Well, more so baseball than the other ones. Baseball was still the big sport, okay? And what it was considered a disputable occupation. No, it was like up there with many being an actor, too. Like in vaudeville was considered, like, come on, you know what I mean? And particularly what I mentioned earlier was in the 1890s. It was brutal. Parents wouldn't let their kids go to ball games because of the violence and the brutality and everything else. So now you're playing it? The parents, they meant well. What are you doing this for? Either you're not going to be talented enough to play professionally, but even if you were, well, come on, I want you to be a doctor or a lawyer, join a trade. So you're right, though. You're right, Warren. There's so many accounts of parents, saying, oh, no, don't play. So they played under this fake name, so their father wouldn't find out. But in any case, what's interesting, back to you talk about their early life with Hank, I call him like he's a personal friend of mine or something. No, but it seems like it because I studied him so much. But what it was there's only two brief incidences that he didn't get a paycheck from baseball. He was obsessed with the game. In his early 20s, Hank worked briefly as a steam fitter's apprentice. And that was one of the only two jobs he ever had outside of baseball. He only worked it with 1 month. And he goes, out of heck with this. So to the disapproval of his father, he traveled to faraway California from Chicago to play ball for St. Mary's College. For 3 years he did this. This is in his early 20s. Now, so I researched that, and I found out something very interesting. He never attended any classes at St. Mary. All he did was play baseball because at that time there was an intense athletic rivalry between California colleges, and the schools would recruit ringers to be on their team. So in St. Mary College at that time, they must have had an excellent team when O'Day was a member, because the team also had 7 other players on their team who later became major leaguers.
Oh, wow.
But they never attended any class there. Oh no, he's going to the college, yeah.
Did they get diplomas? Did they graduate, or what happened?
Yeah. No, nothing. They didn't even receive any credits. But the reason why St. Mary's got away with it was all the colleges in that circuit were doing the same thing. So, okay, I'm not going to call you too much on it because I have my own ringers. So anyway, when that sort of ran out, that's when O'Day goes, well, I'm going to become a professional ball player.
Sure.
Which he did when he joined the minor league team in the Northwestern League in Michigan.
Right, and he had quite the debut season, did he not? I mean, tell us what you can about that first year of professional baseball, playing in the Northwestern League for Michigan. He was a pitcher and an outfielder. Tell us about that.
Yeah, he was a pitcher, center fielder. In fact, well, that was routine in that day when you didn't pitch. He was mainly a pitcher. You played other positions because there was only like 12 guys on the team or something. Some guy would sprain an ankle, okay. Hank, go out to center field, whatever. So he was making $125 a month, age 24. But during that season, management of they were financially strapped, the team.
Mm-hmm.
They go, we have to reduce the roster. So they had to draw 2 names out of a hat to keep going. Well, Hank's name was drawn, and it was an appropriate beginning because he was a well-traveled journeyman pitcher in his day.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking 1883 now. So, but he was a good pitcher, at least above average. And wasn't a great pitcher, but a solid one. So the Toledo Blue Stockings, I love the names of those teams, of the same minor league, they picked up O'Day. But what's interesting about it was the team also signed catcher Moses Fleetwood Walker. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Well, you know what? I am, and I have it written down here. So why don't you tell us, well, first of all, going back to that Michigan team, it was a little interesting that I guess they decided they had to do it in the most fair fashion, and at that time was picking 2 names out of a hat, and he was one of the players cut, despite the fact that he was, at the time, one of the team's best players. So
He was.
Okay.
Yes, well said. Yeah, it was. You're right. They probably did it because of fairness. I was wondering, well, why the heck are they getting rid of O'Day, one of the better players?
Right.
But you're right. It probably was just for fairness. The team didn't last much longer after that anyway. So, but
okay, and then he goes on. Toledo picks him up, and one of Hank's
Toledo
teammates
picks him up, but they also sign almost at the same time Moses Fleetwood Walker.
Right. So tell us tell us who he was and where he fits in baseball history. And
excellent.
And what did the 2 of them mean to Toledo, which, by the way, played in, I believe it was the American Association?
Well, you're getting ahead of yourself.
Okay, all right.
That's when they became a major league team.
Okay.
But in 1883, they were still a minor league team. You bring up something interesting. You're right. So they signed Moses Fleetwood Walker, who would later become the first African-American in Major League Baseball history, 63 years before Jackie Robinson. Everybody forgets, Moses Walker. Well, in any case, right away they had these 2 guys. So they are a minor league team, the Toledo Blue Stockings. So the Sport and Life at that time, which was baseball's leading publication, they were soon proclaiming O'Day and Walker as, quote, one of the most remarkable batteries in the country. Okay, so with the addition of this talented twosome, Toledo quickly rose from 5th place to win the league championship.
Mm-hmm.
And also, they did quite well in exhibition games against major league teams. And that's where what you're thinking of. The next season, the Toledo Blue Stockings, they were so brimming with confidence that they joined the major leagues, which is the American Association.
Okay.
And that's when Walker became the first black, and O'Day became a major leaguer.
Interesting.
And what was interesting when I was researching it, to wrap it up with Moses Walker, Walker, the poor guy, he was on this team, and he suffered much racial abuse from both teammates and opponents. You can imagine.
Sure.
Okay, this is 3 years before Jackie, and he's the first black here, okay, even though it's in the minors. But, okay, on the team was Tony Mulaney, who was a self-admitted racist, and Kurt Welch, 2 great pitchers, who later became major leaguers. He was an open segregationist, okay? They would say that they purposely would throw the ball to hurt the catcher, their catcher.
Huh.
And I'm there, oh, wow, that's pretty dirty. But then my heart sank. I'm researching O'Day, and there's a very esteemed baseball historian, Lee Allen.
Mm-hmm.
There's a room named after him in the Hall of Fame. He's one of the greats.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he mentioned O'Day with Mulaney and Welch as being one of these races. And I go, oh, wow. I go, if this is true, this is a large stain on O'Day's character. And I go, oh, wow. But you have to be truthful to history. You're an historian.
Mm-hmm.
So now that gives me another path. Now I'm going to see, hey, now, wait a minute. What is the true story with O'Day's character? So I spent months researching it, and I was interviewing probably David Nemec. He's probably the foremost authority on 19th century baseball. I mentioned it to him. And he goes, and all the stuff that he ever researched about O'Day, there was no taint of racism. And I go, oh, wow. And I go, what about Lee Allen's column or his quote where he threw his name in with these two other guys that would admit it? And he goes, that's the only thing I could find. It probably was an error. I'm there, okay. So then I found this guy named David Zhang who wrote a biography of Moses Walker. So I contacted him and I go, hey, what was his relationship with O'Day? He goes, it was great. They were cordial. The other two guys, Mulaney and Welch, would purposely want to hurt him and make fun of him and everything else. O'Day embraced him, pulled him to the side, supported him, wouldn't do that. They worked together, and that's why they became so successful, and that's why the press was really praising them. So, okay, so they had a cordial and great partnership. And that just,
Makes you
made
feel
me feel
good.
better.
Yeah, it makes you
Made
feel
me
good.
feel because I'm there, okay, this O'Day who was my hero, if this was true, forget it.
Yeah.
The guy's no good. But all these other historians, they said that, especially the one that did it was this David Zhang, who he was obsessed about Moses Walker, and he knew everything about him. And he says, oh, no, they were great. So should I continue with, now he's a major leaguer? Or do you have a different question?
No, sure. Let's
Okay.
let's
so
talk
anyway,
a little
now
bit.
they're in the major league.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And in his rookie major league season, Hank pitches 326 innings. Okay. He led the league in losses. He was 9-28, but his ERA was outstanding, and it was a last place team. He was the best pitcher on that team, though, even though he lost 28 games. Well, in any case, what happened was they did so bad, Toledo, that they were dropped from the majors.
Yeah, exactly.
So now he's there, okay, back to the journeyman thing. He's been on 4 teams in 2 years, and okay. So now it's 1885. And he's 26 years old. Oh, but to wrap it up, I wanted to find out what type of a pitcher was he?
I have that written. Yes.
Was it
Can
a
you
fastball?
tell me?
What did he throw?
What did he?
So, and it was interesting. He was very crafty, they said on the mound, but he threw, and he had a world of stuff. That was the quote. But what was interesting, every catcher that caught him said he threw the heaviest and hardest ball they ever caught. They said it was like catching a shot put. In fact, some of the catchers would, to protect their hand with those primitive gloves that they wore, they would insert a slab of raw meat into the thin catcher's glove whenever they had to catch O'Day because of his fastball. They said it was, one catcher said that it was like a shell from a cannon. So I learned that, that was it. He mainly threw a fastball. Well, in any case, now here he is, 26 years old. Again, he's without his team. Okay, his old team was dropped from the majors. They disbanded. But he was able to stay in the major leagues because he signed with Pittsburgh. Great, for the next year. But unfortunately, his father back in Chicago was dying. He loved his father, would travel back to Chicago a lot of times, and he would miss starts. The team got upset with him, and they released him. So now he goes, okay, he stays in Chicago. After his father died, he sent out his resume and that, and the best he could find was Washington, D.C., because this was the middle of the season, Washington, D.C.'s minor league club. They pick him up. And he is outstanding the rest of the year because it was a decent ball club. He finally has some support. He had a 13-2 record, and his earned run average was 0.74.
Wow.
But, again, poor Hank, this success was tempered because, again, he had to return to Chicago. He received news that his 16-year-old brother had died after fracturing of the skull fallen from an amusement park roller coaster in Chicago. Yeah. So he goes, oh, boy. So excellent. So he goes, and the Washington, D.C. minor league club, they disbanded. He goes, oh, boy. So now he's without a team again.
I wouldn't want to sign him because every team he plays for ends up going out of business.
That's well said. So anyway, so he signs with Savannah, Georgia.
Uh-huh.
And again, he is outstanding. He's 26-11, and his earned run average is 1.03. Again, but this is a minor league team. So anyway, the Detroit Wolverines, they were a major league team in the National League.
Mm-hmm.
They were in a hot battle to win the pennant. Okay, this was 1886.
Mm-hmm.
So they pick him up. They pick him up late in the season. Great. He is overjoyed until he learns, oh no, this is like a 3-part deal. Detroit was immediately selling him to the last place Washington Nationals. Oh boy, right. So the only good thing is, with his new club, Hank finally finds some stability. He remains with them for 2 full seasons, which is a rarity for him. Again, the team is terrible, though. They're in last place. He did lead the league in the statistical category for his first and only time in his major league career. But it was a dubious one. Most hit by batters.
And I think losses, too.
Oh, man. Yeah, exactly. You know, that was a different year. You're good. You did your homework, right? But one thing going for him was he was definitely the team's workhorse.
Uh-huh.
For the 2 years, he pitched more than 650 innings.
Wow.
It was nuts, okay? And what was interesting is catcher was the venerable Connie Mack. And they became friends.
Yeah.
You know, he was his battery mate.
Uh-huh.
So in any case, okay, we're moving along. Now it's 1889.
And this is big. Hold on. This is big because this is when he gets what I think is the biggest break in his career, 1889, and he proved to be a most crucial component to the team that he winds up with. So why don't you tell us about that?
You said it. You hit it on the mark. Okay, that 1889 season, his 6th major league season, was definitely the most thrilling and satisfying of his playing career. Okay, he began the year with the last place Washington. He had a 2-10 record. But the New York Giants, okay, in the same league, they were fighting for the pennant. And they saw something special in O'Day, and they purchased him. And what was amazing for the time, they gave Hank $200 of the cut. You know, whoa, you know, which is big money then. Well, now he's finally supported by a solid offense. This was a new experience for Hank. The Giants had 4 Hall of Famers in their lineup. They had 2 Hall of Famers in their rotation. However, what was fascinating was here you had this journeyman pitcher. It was O'Day who proved the difference because he comes in and he wins 9 games down the stretch, and they won the pennant.
Yeah, he went 9-1.
They definitely wouldn't have won it without him.
Yeah, he went 9-1 with 10 complete games, and then in a championship series against Brooklyn, it was not a best of 7. It wasn't a best of 5 or a best of 3.
No, it was a best of 11.
And tell us what happened there, because it was O'Day and a guy by the name of Cannonball Crane who made all the difference in the world for the Giants.
Exactly. The Giants hitters were outstanding, but they're 2 aces. These are future Hall of Famers, Tim Keefe and Mickey Welch. They were pounded. They look like Sandlot pitchers. So New York found itself behind early in the series. Now the Giants manager, Jim Muttrey, he turns to his 2 backup guys, Cannonball Crane, and don't you love the names of those 19th century guys?
It's awesome.
And Hank O'Day, he says, you're going to pitch the rest of the game, the rest of the series. And this is a best of 11. And they responded with 6 consecutive wins to capture the crown for the New York Giants.
So all Brooklyn had to do was win one more game, basically.
Exactly. And he was the hero. Even though it was an early World Series, some of it don't consider it official, but I certainly do. He was dazzling on the mound. He won the only 2 low-scoring games, won to tie the series, and he won the one that was the deciding contest. In 23 innings, he gave up 3 earned runs.
Wow.
And the hitters batted a microscopic 135 batting average against him.
Wow.
So anyway, he's on cloud 9 now. Finally, this was his greatest season. Well, it didn't last long.
Yeah, okay, so let's go there. So after that 1889 season, O'Day joined about, 150 or so other players, and he jumped to the newly formed Players League. So what was the impetus for the Players League?
Well, okay, for decades, they had no power whatsoever, the players. The owners had everything. There was no unions at that time. You started a union, well, you were just fired. You were just out of here, Obviously, they paid their best ball players like peanuts. They gave them almost nothing. So finally, the players, they were fed up with this treatment. And they go, wait a minute, we're the talent. So they formed their own major league. And it's considered an official major league. There was 3 major leagues in that year, 1890. The National League, which still exists, the American Association, and they died shortly thereafter because the 3rd league was the Players League. Mm-hmm. That's what it was called, the Players League. Mm-hmm. Now, and 12 members of the 1889 World Champions, including Hank O'Day, they started their own team. They call themselves the New York Giants, but we're now the new New York Giants of the Players League. Yeah, and unfortunately, at least I think, it would have really changed baseball history. These ball players weren't businessmen, of course. So the league died, even though more people were going there, because this is where the talent was. Mm-hmm. You could really say that in that year, the National League and the American Association, they were barely major league caliber. Mm-hmm. You could call them, even though in the official books all those major league records count, they were really high minors. And the Players League, they had all the best ball players. But it dissolved after 1 year because the players didn't know how to, run the business. Mm-hmm. But it was another fine year for O'Day. He pitched, he won 22 games, pitched 329 innings. Well, and what happened was the Players League folded after one season, 1890, and all the circuits players, they scattered. Most of them returned into the big league club of the previous year that they were on. A lot of them went back to the New York Giants of the National League.
All right, hold on. I have a question here.
Sure.
Did the stats from the Players League carry over? Do you know if the stats from the Players League carried over into the final stats? Were they considered major league stats, I guess? Did they count?
100%.
Okay, I was just curious
100%, and they had to, even in the time, because a lot of the newspapers and the sporting news and all those big publications, a lot of them didn't like the Players League. They wanted, they were like upstarts. They called them rebels. But to their credit, hey, wait a minute. These are the most talented people, talented ball players in the league, in the country. It would be weird not counting their stats before and after, but not during that 1 year. So reluctantly, if you look at the official baseball encyclopedia, all those stats count.
Oh, okay.
As well they should. Mm-hmm. But that's a good question. But in any case, here it was. What was unfortunate for Hank, it was Hank's last major league season as a player.
Yeah, his arm was. Yeah, he was overpitched. I guess his arm was hurting. And the one thing you wrote about after that 1 year in the Players League that I found really interesting, and I never knew about this, was the fact that baseball moved the pitcher's mound back to 60 feet and 6 inches.
That's true.
And
Yes.
and how far was it previous to that, and why did they move it? And obviously, the extra distance hurt Hank. He just couldn't be effective at that point in his career from 60 feet 6 inches.
Exactly. Excellent question. What happened was, by this time, the many innings he had hurled over the previous 7 years as a major leaguer, they had taken their toll. His right arm was dead. And to make it even worse was they had just recently, just then, they increased the distance from the mound. Now, oh my God, I got to learn this. But where everybody's mistaken, the distance before, it was a pitcher's box. You still hear that term. Oh, that's a single through the box, even though it hasn't been a box since 1893. You know what I mean? So here you had that, and what happened was the front line of the box was 50 feet. But the back line was 55 feet. So it wasn't, so you read a lot that, the distance was increased from 50 feet to 60 feet 6 inches. That's 10 feet. No, it was really only 5 feet because it was pushed back from the back of the box. So what happened was they took, rather than a pitcher's box, and we still have it today, that was one of the biggest transformations in baseball.
Sure.
Rather than that, they put it at 60 feet 6 inches, and they put a slab, a rubber slab. Now, rather than pitching from a box, you got to pitch from your foot on this slab.
Why did they move it though? What was the reason for making where they threw from 60 feet 6 inches instead of 55 feet?
Well, what happened was, to make it interesting too, it was really 55 and a half feet was the back line.
Okay.
So that's how we get to 6 inches. So sometimes you read this in baseball books, was that, why that odd distance of 60 feet 6 inches? How come it isn't just 60 feet? And then occasionally you'll still see these in publications, when they first did it, the surveyor made an error, and he read it wrong, and he made it an additional 6 inches, which, when you really think about it, really doesn't make any sense. Everybody made the same mistake. What it really was they were just putting an additional 5 feet behind the line from the previous season. So it was only, and since that was 55 and a half feet, now it's 60 feet and a half feet. And that's why you have the odd distance. But back to what you were saying, what they wanted to make it tougher on the pitcher, because you could do some wild stuff in there. You could turn your back, you could go from, it was more like fast pitch softball. You see that where guys are jumping all over, and, they wanted to increase offense. Because, again, this is entertainment. It's money. When offense goes down, people aren't coming out to the ballpark. The average fan.
Sure.
The true fans, they like seeing a 2-1 thing, but the average fan doesn't. They want to see action. People want to see stuff happen, not stuff prevented from happening. So the offense was going down steadily the previous years. So they go, wow, we have to change this. And that was a remarkable change. So they're still thinking about it now, moving it back, but that's a different story. Yeah, but that's they always try to get that perfect balance between the offense and defense, but that's why they changed this. So O'Day was really screwed.
Yeah, and this was about
his arm was dead.
Yeah,
no team wanted a 35-year-old with a dead arm. They increased the distance, so it's even more unlikely that he's going to come back. But again, O'Day loved baseball. So he was determined to extend his baseball life. So for the next 3 years, he toiled for 4 different teams in 4 different minor leagues, moving from one to another.
Uh-huh.
Every year he had a losing record, but every year he had decent earned run averages, but never good enough by any means to make it back to the big leagues. Mm-hmm. He was like an average minor leaguer in those days at best.
Mm-hmm. So he looked. Yep. So this is when he says, you know what? Let's try something different. Let's try umpiring. And here's the cool thing. During his playing days, there were a couple of times where he was called upon to umpire, and he did a pretty darn good job at it. So where did his interest in umpiring come from? And, tell us about the move from playing to becoming the guy who made the calls.
Very good. You see, because what happened was, you have to remember, he did umpire before, but this is back in his playing days, and he never thought of umpiring as a career, or even he only thought of it now in 1893 because, I want to stay in baseball. But what happened was, what you mentioned was really fascinating. Okay, during his era, when he was a pitcher in the major leagues and into the early years of the 20th century, this lasted for 40 years, only one umpire was selected to work major league games. And quite often, the umpire wouldn't even show up by the game time. It could be because of travel disruptions, illness, or usually he just simply quit. There was a brutal time to be an umpire, and he says, no way am I going to do it. Okay, so whenever this occurred, the 2 managers would get together because you have all these fans in the stands. You don't want to send them home. Nobody makes any money. Everybody's upset. They just want a game to be played. So whenever this occurred, and it wasn't common, but it certainly wasn't uncommon. Okay, during the time that O'Day was a player, 135 times a player had to serve as an umpire for a game.
Wow.
So 135 times over a span of 7 years. Well, not common, but certainly not uncommon. Well, in any case, what happened was the 2 managers would get together and they would select one of their players to umpire the game. So there would be 2 umpires. And usually it was a pitcher on his off day or a catcher needing a day off. And the selected player would have to be agreed upon by the opposing manager. Because, the character or something. Hey, guys had reputations, Mm-hmm. You want it to be fair. So, okay, and the players would umpire the game in their baseball uniforms. That must have been a sight, So in any case, even when he was a rookie pitcher with Toledo in the major leagues, 1884, O'Day was selected to serve as the umpire when the regular arbiter had failed to show up.
Mm-hmm.
He had never done it before. But it was amazing. You read the accounts of that game, and they praise him, call him a natural. And what was fascinating, everybody else, you were always selected one guy. Oh, let's give this guy a chance to umpire and all this stuff. Hank, in his era, would serve as a substitute umpire for 7 games. Far more than everybody else. Mm-hmm. Everybody else would do 1 or 2 games. Okay, let's have this guy. Because he had a reputation even then for his honesty and integrity and talent. So that's why they would select him to serve as the player umpire. And what was interesting is when he was the umpire for those 7 games, his team lost 4 times. Now, you can imagine his teammates had some choice words for him in the clubhouse afterwards. But again,
sure.
That was his character, was that, hey, baseball, no, you don't mess with it. You always have to be fair. So anyway, now he's at a crossroads. 1894. He doesn't know what the heck to do. Maybe I'll go into umpiring. So he did it briefly in minor leagues. But then, and this is what's interesting, I still don't know exactly why. Well, I do know why he returns to Chicago. Because, again, more tragedies. He had several of them. His older brother, age 38, who he played ball with in the Sandlots, he committed suicide. His mother died. All during this period. He comes back to visit her. His younger sister dies. All this, so he comes back to Chicago. And he takes a job in Chicago City Recorder's office. So this is only the second job he ever had outside baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at this point, it's probable that he's given up baseball as a career because he took the security of a government job. But why he gave it up, I don't know. It wasn't because he wasn't tough. It would be proved years later. You know what I mean? Maybe it was a low salary. I don't know. But in any case, he was there with his family. But here is the cool part, and baseball benefited from it. Fortunately for baseball, O'Day remained a dedicated baseball fan, and he would often visit the ballpark, taking a day off of being a clerk, to catch a game. So anyway, on July 7th, Hank O'Day is sitting in the grandstands among 9,000 other fans, awaiting the start of the Chicago Cubs and Cleveland Spiders game. Okay, and what happens is the Chicago team owner, James Hart, he notices O'Day in the stands. And he comes up to him and he goes, Hank, because he remembered him as a player. He goes, can you do me a favor? Can you serve as the umpire? Rather than get a player.
Sure.
You used to do it before. I remember it. And Hank, okay, he agrees. And the rest, they say, is history. During that contest, the game, it was really close. There was not even a semblance of anybody arguing.
Mm-hmm.
He took control. If anybody would push another guy or something, he would just come right up to him and stop it. But sitting in the stands, it was weird. There was 4 owners of National League teams. They were there for some meeting or something like that. They saw it.
Mm-hmm.
And they were so impressed with Hank's work as an umpire that they all contacted National League President Nick Young to immediately hire him as a full-time Major League umpire. So that just proves that he was a natural. He must have had some special knack for doing it. He never really did it before. So anyway, he's offered a contract and he accepts it.
Mm-hmm.
And it would prove to be the wisest decision he ever made because, hey, this was a role he was born to perform.
Sure, a great decision. A great decision for baseball, too.
And fortunately for every baseball fan, they came after, including now. Because you'll see, more what he does. Well, he quits his job, signs the contract. 2 days later, he's calling balls and strikes for the Giants-Cubs game in Chicago, and 48 hours earlier, he was just a fan in the stands. So for the remainder of the season, he travels all around the National League, and he umpires every day straight for a total 75 games.
Wow.
But this is where he's cool, okay? It was, and like I mentioned, it was a brutal period at that time. And that's when, again, the integrity. He realized, no, I'm not a good enough umpire as I could be. So he tells the National League, I'm going to the minors to learn my craft better. And they were stunned. For less money and everything else, he's going to do this. So that's when he goes to the Western League.
Mm-hmm.
And as we talked about earlier, this was an epiphany for him. This was incredible. How structured it was. It was excellent. Van Johnson was in charge, and he would find guys. He would do everything to help keep the game under control. And again, that's where it was like a revelation to him. He goes, this is the way baseball should be played. So now, the next year, he's back. He's back in the majors. And that's when he was determined to do his best to improve the game. And again, it was one of his most immense contributions to the game. He used the full use of all the weapons an umpire has to perform and enforce some discipline. warning, fines, ejections, forfeits, recommended suspensions, did everything. Boom. He ejected players at a steady clip. In fact, O'Day has the third highest ejection rate of any umpire in history.
Okay, wait. So now, I got to ask you.
Yes.
Ejections and Connie Mack.
Oh, wow, that's a good one. Right. What happened was this was back when he first umpired. And it's back 2 years earlier, before he came back from the minors, when he was just working those games. And what happened was he was doing a game. That is a great story. His old friend, his old battery mate, his old catcher was manager at the time. And unlike, usual, he's a saintly gentleman, Connie Mack. He was never ejected from a ball game for 50 years, except once, by Hank O'Day. So that just tells you something right there. For 50 years as a manager, Mack was never ejected, except for once. And that was it. And he goes, well, that was his attitude, O'Day. I don't care if you're a friend. You're gone if you don't respect the game. Yep. You have to respect the game.
All right. I got it. Yep. So now we're going to jump ahead many years because we're talking about him as an umpire right now, and then we're going to go back. But the most legendary of all his games as an umpire occurred on September 23rd, 1908. The Cubs and the Giants, the Merkle Boner. Again, I'm going to turn it over to you. Please give us a little historical context on how big this game was, how hotly contested it was, and what happened.
Wow. I knew you were going to get to this, and it's like, it's a biggie.
Yeah.
You could simply say that the Merkle game, you could say that it's the most celebrated, most widely discussed, the most controversial contest, not just in baseball, in the history of sports. Maybe the Dempsey fight, with the boxing thing. Maybe that comes second. But the Merkle game far surpasses it. In fact, no game in all of baseball history has had more written about it than this game. So here we go. Yes, it's, oh boy. Yes, it's a biggie. Okay, September 23rd, 1908. This is the most exciting baseball race in baseball history, even without this famous game. Well, O'Day's ruling, that game, sent a shockwave throughout the baseball world. It turned the most exciting race of all time into the most controversial, the most troubling. And, well, that decision became O'Day's legacy. It's even on his Hall of Fame plaque, but that's a different thing. First, we have to set the stage, because everybody has a different opinion about the game. Did O'Day do the right call, or didn't he? Now, you have to set the stage. He was an umpire for 12 years at this point in the major leagues. He was 49 years old. He was highly respected for the way he handled the game. Okay, so now there was an interesting practice at that time. Players at the end of the game would either walk or run onto the field. It was accepted now. Now you only see it, you even rarely see it now, when Hank Aaron hit his homer, or Bill Mazeroski hit his homer, or you win the 7th game of the World Series. You'll see all these fans run out onto the field to celebrate. No, okay, great. Now security is a little bit better, you don't see it. But back in those early days of the 20th century, very common. At the end of the game, fans were walking out on the field. They could be going to their car in the parking lot in the outfield. That's where there was an entrance and exit. It was just a common practice. You went out on the field, the fans, hundreds of them, thousands. And if it was a victory, an exciting walk-off victory, they would be charging out there, grabbing the players, putting them on their shoulders, stealing their caps. And it's important that I mention this common practice because it had been going on for decades, because it plays a pivotal part in the famous or infamous Merkle game. Okay, so here it is. So the practice was, since the fans would run out on the field, the players, they would run off the field as fast as they could, holding their hat, their cap, so it wouldn't be taken, and run to the clubhouse in the outfield.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody did it. Okay, it would happen once a week. Great. So here we have this game. This is an intense pennant race. Who's going to win it? The Giants, the Cubs, or the Pirates? A virtual tie.
Mm-hmm.
So it's every game is at the end. This is the end of the season. About 2 more weeks to go. So here we have the bottom of the 9th, and the Cubs are at the Giants' Polo Grounds. There's 2 outs. The score is tied. Perfect. Moose McCormick is on first base. Fred Merkle is a 19-year-old rookie. 19 years old, a teenager. He faithfully started that game at first base because the regular first baseman, Fred Tunney, was injured. If just any little thing was changed, baseball history would be changed. That's what makes it so fascinating. So anyway, Moose McCormick is on first. Merkle hits a single to right center. McCormick scampers to third base, and this is where it's important. It was reported that Merkle possibly could have ran to second for a double because it was hitting the gap. But with 2 outs, this is too risky. His run didn't mean anything. He's thrown out. That's the end of the inning. There's 2 outs. So it's interesting to think how different it would have been had he tried to stretch it into a double. But he didn't, considering what comes afterwards. So now the score is tied, 2 outs with runners on first and third. Al Bridwell comes to bat, and he rips a solid single to center field. It was hit directly toward the base umpire, Bob Emseel, who has to dive to the ground to get out of the way of the sizzling line drive. Now, McCormick from third base scores with quotation marks around it, easily from third base, apparently ending the game. The fans go crazy, and hundreds of them run onto the field in celebration, believing their team had a walk-off victory. However, Merkle, the rookie, he had stopped halfway to second, sees the fans, and goes running to the Giants' outfield clubhouse to escape them. Again, common practice. Okay, no problem. What follows next was pure pandemonium. Solly Hoffman, the Cubs center fielder, runs after the ball as the fans are swarming on the field. Johnny Evers, the Cubs second baseman, is standing on second base screaming for the ball. He's screaming for it because under the rules, if Merkle is forced out at second, the run doesn't count.
Right.
And it goes into extra innings.
Right.
That's the key. Whenever a run can never score, when a base runner is forced out. So now, Evers was smart. Okay, so Hoffman throws the ball off the mark into the infield, where a Cubs player picks it up. Seeing what was happening, New York Giants Joe McGinnity, he realizes, oh my God, Evers is going to do this. Never thought of that. He's going to get the out. Man, our victory is going to be taken away. So Joe McGinnity, the coach, Hall of Fame pitcher, by the way, but whatever, he's just a coach at this time. He runs and he takes the ball from the Cubs, infielder. Now you can imagine fans are swooping out there. They think they won. They don't see what's going on. He grabs it and he throws it into a group of fans. McGinnity throws the ball into a group of fans behind third base. It hits some fan who's wearing a derby in it. So in any case, Evers, he's not giving up. He eventually gets a baseball. If it's an actual game ball, nobody will ever know for sure.
Sure.
But he's standing on second base with this baseball, and he's declaring a force out. Merkle is out, and the game's got to go into extra innings. We're going to the 10th inning. We didn't lose. Now, the Cubs shortstop, Joe Tinker, he's pleading with the umpire, Emseel, to call the out. But in the chaos, MCL says, hey, I don't know if Merkle touched second base. I can't call him out. No umpire in his right mind will call a guy out if he didn't see it. So he's assuming that Merkle, okay, touched the base and the game's over. Because remember, he had jumped out of the way of the line drive, so he didn't see it. However, Hank O'Day was the home plate umpire. And being the excellent umpire that he is, he was watching everything. So he goes out and he confers with his partner. Again, here's another thing that people forget about. Under the rules, an umpire cannot change the call of another umpire. He could give him more information on a judgment call. He can give him more information. Hey, his foot came off the base. Oh, and then he changes his call. That's how they work as a team. So he couldn't go out there and go, oh, no, he's out. Because then the other team would protest, hey, you can't tell him. You got to give him the information, and he changes it. So O'Day comes running out to his partner and tells them Merkle never touched second. And MCL goes, what? He goes, he just ran directly to the clubhouse. Evers has the ball. You should call him out. So MCL calls the force out. Now this nullifies the win and run, and O'Day proclaims the game a tie. But the game did not continue in the extra innings because Hank also determines that by the time the grounds would be clear to fans, it would be too dark for further play. Now the fans out on the field, they hear this, and they surround O'Day, and they began pounding him, punching him, kicking him. Other fans start doing it to his partner. What the heck are you doing here? Okay, there were attackers on the outside of this mob. They're throwing newspapers and cushions and bottles at O'Day. Well, finally, police officers rush in to rescue the umpires, and they escort them to the safety of the umpires' dressing room. Okay, now the fans, some of them knew, a lot of them didn't. Some reporters are reporting that it was a walk-off victory for the Giants. Other reporters, this is just a chaos. This is a cluster thing. Okay. So now, what was interesting, both teams put the game under protest, saying that they had won the game. Now, the Cubs argued that they went on forfeit because of the lack of security, which prevented the game continuing. That was knocked out because O'Day says it would have been too dark anyway. Okay. The Giants argue that no way, this is a crime. This is a shame. You should not be penalized for technicality. Merkle's actions was an act that had gone unpunished by umpires for decades. Now you're going to call it for a crucial game, and that's where there's a controversy. You still see some highly respected baseball people, baseball historians saying that, O'Day, this is a terrible call by him. Okay. Now, the National League president, Harry Pulliam, he denies all protests and he upheld Hank's decision. And he said the game will be replayed in its entirety.
Wow.
The day after the season, on October 8th, if necessary. See, he's trying to get out of this controversy.
Sure.
By saying, okay, it might not even be played. What if the Cubs win the next 8 games?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Or
we don't even have to play. Or the Giants, or the Pirates, whatever. Okay. What he should have did, and both teams wanted it, okay, even though both teams wanted a victory, but if we're going to replay it, let's have a doubleheader the next day. But
he didn't
National
do
League
it.
President Pulliam would hope that it would just become a moot point. Okay, great. But they didn't do a doubleheader. If they would have did a doubleheader, it would have dampened the controversy. You know, instead, discussion now, this was hanging over the head. The famous Merkle game. Discussion of it simmered for days. It festered into a huge deal the next 2 weeks. There were scathing editorials and extreme pressure that O'Day and Pulliam changed their decision, award the win to New York. But the two, they remain steadfast. They go, no, this is the right thing. They go, no, you shouldn't win on some little trivial thing. Okay, so there was an appeal process now. You can appeal it, and it goes to the Special National Commission. So that takes them 10 days, and they support Pulliam's decision. No. The rule is that if you're forced out, great. Now there was a complaint that they go, hey, we don't even know if he had the right ball. How can they call him out? And O'Day goes, I don't care. I saw the interference. I'm going to allow it even if Evers never even touched it, because a New York player interfered with the ball that was thrown in, and the ball was still live. Okay, you see, he's following the rules. He goes, boom, this is it. Now, Hank's call becomes crucial because, believe it or not, the Giants and Cubs finished the season in the dead heat with identical records of 98 and 55. Now the Merkle game had to be replayed, which the Cubs won, giving them the pennant. And, whoa. And New York Giants, the press, everybody believes they got ripped off. But also, it was interesting, that game itself, because there's two games they call the Merkle game. The replay game is called the Merkle game, because that was crucial. Whoever wins this wins the pennant.
Right.
The other game they called the Merkle's Boner game.
Right.
Yeah, sounds like some title for a porn movie, but it was Merkle's Boner is what it was, because what it was poor Merkle.
Yeah.
He was crucified by the press and the fans. They called him stupid. They called him an idiot. They called him bonehead. That became his nickname for the rest of his career, his 16-year Major League career. McGraw never blamed him. A lot of people didn't blame him. What was interesting, the term bonehead and boner, okay, it was created by that incident.
Huh.
Yeah. But in any case,
wow. Yeah.
In fact, Bridwell said that he wished he never got that hit because the poor Merkle was, saddled with the nickname Bonehead for the rest of his life.
Oh,
but back to the second Merkle game. That was also fascinating, even though we're getting away from O'Day. Both teams, whoever wins this game wins the playoffs. Now we're used to it with the wild card or the play-in game. But that was big then. You win this game, you go immediately to the pennant. Originally, the Giants said, we want to play a 3-game series. Because under the rules, it said that if the season ends in a tie, you do a playoff, best of 3. But O'Day, always following the rule, goes, whoa, this is a replay game.
Yeah.
The team isn't tied at the end of the season. We have to replay this game if necessary.
Right.
So now they're really mad at O'Day because now it comes down to one crucial game. And there was a wild one also. Both teams, what they tried to do, they took their subs before the game when they were working out to try to pick a fight with the star of the other team. So both guys would be ejected, and the star would be kicked out, but also the sub. Great. But both teams were doing it, so it didn't work. Well, the Cubs won, and again, the Giants ran onto the field. But this time, guess what they did? Oh, man, that was a brutal time. They attacked the Cub players.
Oh, gosh.
Manager Chan suffered a blow to his throat. He couldn't speak for 4 days. Cub pitcher, Jack Feister, was slashed on the shoulder by a knife.
Oh,
police rescued them, barricaded them in the thing. It was wild. Eventually, police had to draw their revolvers and pushing back the mob. Wow. Okay, so, but now it was interesting to wrap it up. The game cost Merkle his reputation. He was called Bonehead for the rest of his life. But the National League president, it cost him his life. Okay, you see, yes. Harry Pulliam, after the season, he had a nervous breakdown because of the Merkle game. All the criticism from the press and from other people saying, oh, you can't support O'Day on this, on the technicality. No, I'm going to support the umpire. So he had a nervous breakdown. So he took a leave of absence, and then on July 28th of the next year, he went to the New York Athletic Club, entered a room, pulled out a gun, and shot himself in the head.
Oh,
and this
gosh.
is, again, how the Merkle game just has, oh, man, how tragic it was. He was 39 years old. He left no suicide note. It was a tragic figure. He was a sensitive gentleman in supporting the umpires, and I believe he did the right thing.
Sure.
Okay, he was often taken advantage of. Well, at the funeral, every team attended the funeral. They sent a representative, except for the Giants.
Except for the Giants.
And John McGraw, his famous quote is, very callous, I didn't think a bullet to the head could hurt that guy.
Oh, gosh.
I know. So anyway, but now the third, you had Merkle, you had Pulliam. That affected their life. Cost one, his life itself, and the other one, his reputation as an idiot. But O'Day, he was the other big participant in the infamous game. He would umpire another 17 years, and every time he entered the Polo Grounds, there was abuse and garbage thrown at him by the Giant fans who believed he is the one that robbed them of a championship.
Sure.
So the question is, did O'Day make the right decision? I think so.
He followed it by the rules.
That's it.
Yeah.
And not only this is a key thing that everybody forgets. Okay, Bill Clem. He's probably the most famous umpire.
Right, and he trained under O'Day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He was right. O'Day helped him. Well, in an interview conducted years after the incident, O'Day had been dead. Clem says that he called it the rottenest decision ever made in baseball.
Yeah,
which
he
is
should
really
never
dirty
said
because
that.
this is a fellow ump saying that. He said, though, that he maintained that a player had a right to leave the field when there was no reasonable doubt that the game was over. That's Clem saying this. He goes, the intent of the rule applies only to infield grounders. It does not apply to hits of the outfield, which is dead wrong. How many times have you, as a fan, had seen runners being forced out at second when an outfielder dropped the ball?
A forced play is a forced play, period.
Yes, a man on first, fly ball to the right fielder, the guy drops it. What does he do? He throws to second, gets the force. The bottom line is, but here's the key thing. And they go, well, this has never been enforced for decades. How can you enforce it now? And guess what? He said it best. The bottom line is you can't make any call unless the defense makes an appeal.
Yeah.
As soon as O'Day saw him run to the outfield, Merkle, I'm not going to do anything. Oh, now they're going to play. Now they're making an appeal. Now the defense is taking action. Now I'm going to call it. It's like when you miss a base or bat out of order. The ump has to wait for an appeal. And that's why it wasn't called before. It was Evers that deserves the credit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
by the way, let's wrap up the Merkle part, the Merkle Boner with this. Fred Merkle ended up playing a total of 16 years, and he played 3 of those years with the Cubs long after he played for the Giants. So as much as it did affect him, he did enjoy quite a lengthy career playing 16 years.
He did. It was, but you know what? He suffered through it. I mean, every time he went to a ballpark, there were fans, some even friendly fans. Make sure you touch second base. And they were, in fact, what was sad was, to wrap up the thing with Merkle, was that, and he should be forgiven. He did what any other player would have did. But what happened was, at the end of his playing career, he would be invited back to old-timers games and everything else. He wouldn't attend them. He goes, oh, my God, no.
Yeah.
He says, they just crucified me. And finally he did. He goes, but I'm not putting on an old uniform. And he was happy he did, so I'm glad he died happy because he finally came back. He was an elderly man. He came back to the Polo Grounds, and the fans welcomed him, and there was tears in his eyes. It was good. But he suffered for a long time.
That's good.
Before that.
Hey, Dennis, we jumped way ahead. I jumped way ahead by going all the way out to 1908 to talk about the Merkle Boner. But before all that happened, Hank O'Day actually went into the dugout and became a manager, did he not?
Yes.
Right. So
Yes.
how did he end up going from a baseball player to an umpire, and then all of a sudden he's in the dugout as the manager of the Cincinnati Reds, and then later the Chicago Cubs?
I know. That was amazing. And that was, everybody was stunned. Here he's one of the most respected umpires. He had been umpiring at that point like almost 20 years. And he stuns everybody by accepting the job to be the Cincinnati manager. And he did pretty well, too. And but what was interesting, it was that he didn't put on the uniform. He was like Connie Mack, where I'm going to wear civilian clothes, which prevented him, and nobody knew the rules more than him, which prevented him from going out in the field to change a pitcher or to argue with the umpire or something like that. You have to stay in the dugout unless you're wearing a uniform. And that's what he chose to do. And what was interesting is that when you think about it, here he was a manager then. Now he gets fired. He really quit before he was fired. What do you do then? With the integrity thing, do you have him come back? And everybody wanted him back. In fact, because he was such a great umpire.
But he took a year
American League
off.
tried to hire him.
Didn't he take a year off between Cincinnati and Chicago?
Yes, to come back to umpire. You're right. In 1912, he was the manager of the Reds, and then he gets fired. Now, there was some people who go, well, what? Can he come back as an umpire? Well, we definitely want him. And the American League tried to steal him then. They go, hey, now you don't have to umpire against your former team that you just managed. But no, he stayed loyal. So then he umpired in 1913. Then, to make it even weirder, he becomes a manager again in 1914 for the Cubs. And then he comes back the next year. It took him a while to come back because now reporters started going, hey, wait a minute. Is this good for the game? Having a former, he's going to be making calls against, the team he just managed and, two teams he just managed, the Reds and the Cubs. But he was so good that there was no problem. He just came right back.
Right. All right. I got a couple of things here for you. We talked about his parents who were deaf earlier in the show. So I'm going to say a name here, Luther Taylor.
Yes, Luther Taylor. In a more insensitive time, he was called Dummy because he was a deaf mute. Okay, but Luther Taylor is what I like to call him. Well, in any case, he taught sign language since he was deaf to his teammates on the Pittsburgh Pirates so they could communicate. Great. There's another science. Well, he was coaching third base one day when he wasn't pitching, and he was making fun of Hank O'Day, making fun of his calls and making fun of his, somber personality by using sign language to his teammates in the dugout. In his dugout, the teammates in the dugout knew the sign language, so they were laughing. And everybody was, this is great, because he would do it against other umpires. Oh, and the umpire didn't even realize it. Mm-hmm. However, Hank O'Day, with parents who were deaf, knew the sign language. So he steps forward and he signals to Luther Taylor, "You've just been ejected from the game in sign language." And the look on Taylor's face must have been great. And his teammates laughed at that. But I just think that's a great story. He just comes, hey, you're kicked out of this game. You're gone.
All right. How about Bill Dolan and being purposely ejected from games, and Hank O'Day would have none of it, so Bill couldn't get to the track, I guess.
You said it best, right? It's just that, right. Again, it was integrity. He knew that Bill Dolan was he was a gambler, and he knew there was this big race in the city that they were playing in, and he wanted to go out, and he found out that he wanted to be purposely ejected. And no matter what, Dolan called him. O'Day wasn't going to kick him out. You're staying right here, and you're going to play this game. And he says, what the heck, and no matter what he called them. So, again, but what was interesting was that it sounds like from these two incidences that he had a sense of humor. If anybody didn't have a sense of humor, it was Hank O'Day. He was so somber. His nickname was the Reverend. He never cracked a smile. Christy Matheson said in 20 years, I think he heard him laugh once. It was even some of his fellow umpires referred to O'Day as Groucho behind his back. So those stories illustrate, that, oh, wow, he was quite a character, but he was quite a character in another way. But one thing, I have to mention this, his World Series appearance.
Yes.
That, if nothing else says how much he was respected, it's because World Series assignments, especially in those days before unions, they clearly reveal the greatest umpires in any era, as well as in baseball history. Because, you can imagine the first modern World Series. It was established in 1903. Now, the two leagues were asked to send their best umpire to work the best of 9 series. It was the best of 9 then. The National League, of course, selected O'Day, and the American League chose Tommy Connolly. But this is what's remarkable, is that the two umpires didn't alternate base plate during the series. O'Day worked the plate for the first 4 games, and Connolly was just a base umpire. Now think about that.
He's their best, and O'Day's our best. Yeah.
Oh, his reputation was so great. He was so highly acclaimed for his ability to call balls and strikes. He was so noted for his integrity that the American League had no problem having the National League umpire working the plate all the time. For 6 of the first 8 World Series games ever played, O'Day was the plate umpire, even though there was a partner out there.
Right.
It's just amazing.
Let's change here for a second. His demeanor off the field was quite, sullen. He was a loner, never settled down, never bought a home. He lived in hotels. He dined alone. Why? He was like a hermit.
That was it. He was renowned for his moral character, as well as being an odd character. In fact, he was called, quote, from this one respected writer, O'Day was a strange character who lived in a shell, who would emerge only when baseball season came around. Okay? It was amazing. There have been countless people who have devoted their lives to baseball. Oh, Red Shandies and Don Zimmer, and you got all these players. But few, if any, more so than Hank O'Day. He was an umpire and nothing else. Baseball consumed every fiber of his being. Again, leaving no time for anything else. He never attended parties, like you said, the theater, movie houses, any social event. He had no hobbies. You could count the number of O'Day's friends on Mordecai Brown's right hand. It was incredible. He preferred his own company. That was it. Off season, he was a lifelong bachelor, never married, never had any romantic interests, never owned a home, lived in hotels his entire life except for a couple months with his sister, always dining alone. He spent his winters working out so he could be in proper shape to meet the demands of the baseball season. And his off hours, this is wild, he would sit by himself in the hotel lobbies, read nothing but baseball publications, the sports page, and the rule book. That's it. If a player, fan, or sports writer came up to him, he would wave them away unless they wanted to talk about baseball. A cheerful greeting, like, hey, hi, Hank, he would just grumble, never answer back.
Interesting.
It was wild.
Yeah.
But you brought up a good thing. Okay. Everybody was amazed with his personality. Okay, yeah, they interviewed National League President John Heidler, who took over for Pulliam, and they said, what does it take to be a great umpire? And he says, well, you have to live like a hermit. You have to be away from, you can't be friends with players and fans. You are a man without a country. He was saying all this stuff. You have strength of character, courage of conviction. And even though he didn't mention Hank O'Day by name, everybody knew who he was talking about.
Interesting.
But, okay, so that's it. Why was he the way he was? Okay, it would take a skilled psychologist to determine why he was so secretive, why he wouldn't talk, why he was so sullen, why he was sour. Now, one explanation is that it was simply his nature, that O'Day was born not liking people. But this is certainly not true.
Yeah.
I found countless reports, okay, all the reports of him being a grouch, they don't appear until he becomes an umpire.
Mm-hmm.
When you read all the accounts from fans and teammates when he was a player, he's described as a good-natured, happy-go-lucky boy, full of fun as any other player. And it was interesting, he had only 4 friends his entire life.
Wow.
White Sox owner Charles Comiskey, A's manager Connie Mack, his umpire partner Bob Emsley, and John Heidler, National League president.
Mm-hmm.
But what's fascinating, and I'm not a psychiatrist, but it's curious that all were baseball men he knew when he was younger. He played ball with Comiskey as a teenager. He was a teammate with Connie Mack. He was an opposing pitcher with Bob Emsley. And John Heidler was an umpire with him in his early years.
Interesting.
So this is where it's interesting. To psychoanalyze, socialize, and these were his only friends his entire life, even when he was an umpire. Because socializing with them, I think, brought back memories of happier times for O'Day. Now, granted, there were many personal tragedies. His parents, all that, they are also contributors. But this is my theory, okay? Because even when he was 12 years old, the Chicago Fire, people would ask him about it, he would tear up and wouldn't talk about it. Okay. But there's 2 reasons I believe he was so unsociable. The reason he was so miserable was likely the burden of being an umpire in that era. Umpire Silko Waltland, he tried to stop a young Bill Clem from being an umpire by using Hank O'Day as an example. He says, he was told Clem, look at O'Day, one of the best umpires, the best ever. But he's miserable. Umpiring will do that to you. The abuse you get from the players, the insults from the crowds, it will change you. But you know what I think is the real reason? I think that was the reason it changed him because, umpiring, that was his entire life. But I think the real reason for his unique, strange personality was he was so concerned that his integrity as an umpire was beyond reproach that he took it to ridiculous extreme. He was fearful that even the slightest personal relationship might influence his calls on the field.
Wow.
So he refused to get close to anyone. Don't have any friends. Don't meet in social things. No. Baseball and umpiring would be my entire life, both on and off the field, which it's incredible.
Yep.
Yeah.
Dennis, your passion for baseball and Hank O'Day is absolutely incredible. And I know that we could talk for a lot more because we haven't covered so much. But what I want to do is end our conversation this way. Hank O'Day, a guy who meant so much to the game as a player, a manager, an umpire, was consulted on in so many ways, including the rules of the game and helping to develop other umpires and the 4-man crew. He should have been.
You're right.
Yeah, he should have been the first umpire elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame, maybe even as a pioneer of the game, but he wasn't. Sure, 70 some odd years after he passed away, he was enshrined. Now, what I want you to do is tell me the story about Rollie Heyman and the note that you passed along to Rollie and how that might have helped Hank O'Day get into baseball's Hall of Fame, a place that he should have been so many years earlier.
Wow, that's well said. Okay, here it is. When you think about it, Hank O'Day in the Hall of Fame. When he died, you have to go back to that. He died in Chicago in 1935. And in announcing his death, virtually every newspaper included in their headline the name Merkle. And the Merkle is one of the reasons why it took him so long to get in the Hall of Fame, that infamous game. But, okay, getting ahead of myself here. In one of the obituaries, it stated, Hank is gone, because there was glowing things on how great of an umpire he was, how influential he was, with the foul ball rule and everything else, how he still affects the game now, how honest he was. But there was one line that says, Hank is gone, but he'll not be forgotten. Well, sadly, he was forgotten for years, particularly when it came to being bestowed baseball's highest honor. Well, you're right. You're right, Warren. He was finally inducted into the Hall of Fame 78 years after he died and 86 years after he umpired his last game. So I asked myself, why did it take so long for such an influential baseball figure to make it to Cooperstown? Besides being the fact you're an umpire, and a lot of people hate umpires. It's like, well, no. But in any case, okay, the Hall of Fame had its first election in 1936. In the years following, all the great ball players were properly honored, influential pioneers, owners, managers. But what about the umpires? Those dedicated men in blue who had a positive impact on the game. Well, it wasn't until Bill Clem, the most famous umpire in history, died in 1951, that attention was finally brought to the fact that no umpire had ever been inducted. Oh! So shortly thereafter, the legendary Clem was honored, along with Tommy Connolly, as the first umpires enshrined in the Hall of Fame. Now, the main question is, why Connolly over O'Day? As good as an arbiter as Tommy was, Hank had always been considered the greater umpire. No matter what you read, the contemporary accounts, he was certainly more influential. Well, simply put, they were going to put Clem in, National League umpire. Ooh, we have to balance this out. We have to put in an American League umpire. And that's what they did, to balance it. Okay? And they wanted to represent both leagues. Okay. Another reason was Connolly was, at that time, his name was much better known. In 1953, when the first two umpires were elected, he was the American League umpire supervisor. He was still active. His name was in the paper now and then. O'Day had been dead for 18 years. You know, he had really no family to speak of. You know, he was forgotten. He was going to the mist of history. So, okay, after Clem and Connolly, we solved the problem. We finally put umpires in there. It would be another 20 years before another umpire was elected. Then, 6 other outstanding umpires were inducted into the Hall of Fame. However, Hank, arguably the greatest umpire of all time, was always overlooked. So baseball historians, now they're trying to explain it. How come Hank isn't being elected to the Hall of Fame? Some said he had no family to lobby for him. Others said, well, he wasn't particularly friendly. Some historians say, well, he always wanted to stay in the shadows. The players were more important, not the umpire. That's why at first he was against signals, ball and strike. He goes, oh, no, the umpire should be just there as an arbiter, as a judge. But then he finally went with it because it improved the game. But several said it was because of the Merkle game. It's a measure of revenge by New York sports writers. We're not going to put this guy in the Hall of Fame. Others agree, but said, well, it was because Hank's decision was one of the worst calls. Well, I say it was one of the most courageous. Okay, evidence that the Merkle decision was indeed a reason. When O'Day finally was inducted into the Hall of Fame, the headlines read, despite Merkle call, O'Day gets called to Hall. So in many ways, all of them correct. But I always thought the explanations for O'Day not being honored are reasons he should be honored. For Hank, baseball was his love, which came at the expense of having the comfort of friends and family. True, he wasn't a particularly friendly person. But you don't put a guy not in the Hall of Fame because of that. And the reason he was he didn't want to get close to anyone. He was sacrificing his personal life to be a better umpire. One of the few quotes he made was, he goes, I know no friends or enemies on the field. Mm-hmm. An attitude that extended to his personal life. Mm-hmm. Okay, but as for the Merkle incident, there's no better demonstration than O'Day's integrity, and which is one of the criteria, if you read it. Sportsmanship, what he contributes to the game, integrity is right in there. It's a criteria for the Hall.
Yep.
And O'Day certainly had it. On that fateful day, it would have been much easier. A weaker ump would have did it. Just walk off the field when a winner run scored, nobody would have said anything. But that wouldn't have been the ethical thing or the right thing to do. And, of course, goofy Bill Clem's remarks also didn't help his chances of getting in the Hall of Fame. He made his remarks 16 years after O'Day had been dead. Now, Clem is universally recognized as the greatest umpire in baseball history, and he was a great umpire. He's certainly more celebrated than Hank O'Day. You wouldn't be you're not surprised to say that I believe O'Day was a greater umpire.
Sure.
See, the two men had quite different personalities. Clem was a showman. He was a self-promoter. O'Day was just the opposite. Oh, no, I'm not the show. Bill Clem enjoyed drinking, dining with the players and the managers. Hank says, oh, no, that's not right. I'm staying away. Mm-hmm. Clem would make up his own baseball rules. O'Day insisted on the enforcement of the rules always for the integrity of the game. Clem, in fact, may have been involved in more overturned protests than any umpire in history. More controversial contests. He would make up rules because, this is the way I want it. And the team would protest, and the National League president would have to overrule him. So I always thought that he should have been the first guy. But it didn't happen. So the years passed. Now, O'Day would occasionally appear on the Veterans Committee for the Hall of Fame. He would get a smattering of votes, usually from the historians in the group. But the Veterans Committee is made up of Hall of Fame ball players, broadcasters, authors, some owners, maybe a manager. So the vast majority of the people on the committee, they didn't even know who the heck Hank O'Day is. And I don't blame them. They're looking at the ballot, and there's Whitey Herzog, there's Billy Martin, there's, Marvin Miller, non-players on this, and Hank O'Day. Who the heck is Hank O'Day?
Right.
So he was never really got much support. So when his name appeared on the ballot, Hall of Fame Veterans Committee ballot in 2013, I was excited. But I was good, he's getting another chance. But I was worried that nobody knew who he was. So I was concerned that, man, it's not that he doesn't deserve it. That's not the reason he's not getting the votes. It's that nobody knows who the heck Hank O'Day was. This is 8 years later.
Right.
So, fortunately, I came across the people who are on the committee. Now, Roland Heeman, one of the great gentlemen of the game, general manager, just a highly respected baseball figure. I saw his name, and I was fortunate enough to know him. So I contacted Mr. Heeman, and I sent him an essay. I wrote about O'Day, stating all of his outstanding contributions, what he did for the great game of baseball. It's still in effect now, highlighting his career. So I asked Mr. Heeman, would you please make copies of this report? I don't even know the addresses of some of these players or people on the committee. Could you please just give him the report? on Hank O'Day. So at least they can give a fair idea whether to vote for him or not vote for him.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Heeman goes, great, send it to me. I may not vote for him. I may vote for him. Great. So, and I'm there, that's all I ask. So Mr. Heeman gets the report, and he contacts me back, and he goes, oh, my God, this guy was really something. And he goes, well, I'm going to distribute it, and at least I know he's going to get my vote.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this guy, an influential figure. So he gives it to the other members. And the next day I get a call from Mr. Heeman, goes, Hank O'Day is now a Hall of Famer.
That's awesome.
I still get choked up with that.
That's awesome.
And he goes, you can't tell anybody because, you know, nobody knows yet. But he just wanted to make my day by saying O'Day made the Hall of Fame.
That's awesome.
So, what was amazing was he received 94% of the vote.
Wow.
From that committee.
Wow.
Yes. And I don't know who voted for him. Who was on there was Hall of Famer Burt Blyleven and Phil Necro and Sutton. I know he got Heeman's vote. There were prominent sports announcers. I'm sure that he got the historians' vote because they knew who he was. The other guys didn't. But I'm glad that he's finally in because he should be remembered.
Yep,
he
absolutely.
should be on, and he's perfect for your podcast.
There you go.
Forgotten Heroes.
Yep,
so,
absolutely. Dennis, I want to again thank you so much for taking so much time out of your evening to join me on Sports Forgotten Heroes. Like I said, we could talk for a lot more about more about Hank O'Day, and we haven't even covered so much about it, but about him. And wow, what a great figure in the history of baseball.
Well, thank you for having me on. It was my honor, and I'm just glad that people, at least more people, know who Hank O'Day was. Certainly a fascinating character in baseball history, no matter which way you look at it, even if you don't agree with his Merkle call, which I think was. You see, my nickname for him, I always called Hank O'Day this. Out of respect, I called him the courageous curmudgeon because that's what he was, and I wish I would have met him. I wish I could have a time machine, go back in time. But thank you, Warren, for everything.
You got it. Thanks so much for being here. On the field, as a pitcher, Hank O'Day appeared in 201 games, and he started 92 of them. He won 73 and lost 110. His career ERA was 3.74. As a hitter, O'Day did not meet with a lot of success. His career batting average was just 190, but he was signed to play for his arm rather than his bat. As a manager, as we talked about during today's podcast, he was okay. With the Reds, he was 75 and 78, and with the Cubs, he was 78 and 76. But again, his biggest contributions to the game came as an umpire and a consultant on the rules of the game. And his induction into baseball's Hall of Fame by the Veterans Committee in 1983 was certainly long overdue. Once again, I'd like to thank today's guest, Dennis Bingham, for spending so much time with us as we talked about, one of the most unique and important individuals in baseball history, Hank O'Day. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.